Ranger dropped without a sound. No whimper, no warning. 1 second he was moving beside her at a dead run, the next his legs folded and his body hit the stone path like something inside him had simply stopped. Mara Voss was on her knees before his chest even stopped moving. Her hands were already searching, and when she looked up at the mission commander standing over them both, her voice came out low and absolutely certain. Who signed off on his pre-mission medical check? Nobody answered, and that silence was going to cost someone everything. Drop a comment right now telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what happens on that mountain tonight is going to stay with you long after this video ends. The mission briefing had lasted 41 minutes and covered everything except the thing that mattered most. Mara had sat in the back of the operations tent with Ranger pressed against her left leg, his broad head resting on her boot, the way he always did when he was paying attention to a room. She had studied the maps, memorized the exfil routes, noted the weather window, tracked every word Lieutenant Commander Brett Solis said about the 4 hostages in the structure 2 kilometers up the ridge. She had done all of that with complete focus, the same way she did everything. But she had also watched Ranger. She watched him because she always watched him, because 2 years of working together had taught her that Ranger communicated in small adjustments, a shift in his breathing, a change in how he carried his weight on his front legs, the particular way he held his ears when something in his environment was telling him something she could not yet hear. She had learned to read those signals the way some people learn to read a second language, slowly at first, then fluently, then so naturally that she forgot she was translating at all. During the briefing, Ranger had been still. Too still. Not the trained stillness of an alert working dog in a professional environment. Something quieter than that. Something that sat just slightly wrong at the edge of her awareness the whole time. Like a note played half a tone flat in an otherwise clean piece of music. She had told herself it was the elevation. They were high enough that even acclimatized operators sometimes moved through the first hour of a mission with less efficiency than usual. She had told herself it was the cold, though Ranger had worked in worse cold without breaking stride. She had told herself she was reading into things because she was keyed up, because this mission mattered, because 4 civilians were waiting on a ridge in the dark, and everything had to go right. She had stepped off at 03:20 hours, with those explanations sitting in the back of her mind, not quite believing any of them, not quite ready to say so out loud. Ranger had held pace with her for the first kilometer. She had stayed attuned to him in the way she always did on an approach. Peripheral awareness, weight check, breathing pattern, the cadence of his stride on loose rock. He was slower than his baseline. Not dramatically, maybe 3 or 4%. But she knew his baseline the way she knew her own pulse. And 3 or 4% wrong was still wrong. She had almost keyed her radio at the 900-meter mark. She had her hand on the transmit button and everything. Then Ranger had picked up his pace slightly, just enough to close the small gap that had opened between them, and she had exhaled and kept moving. That was the decision she would replay in her mind for a long time afterward. Not with guilt, exactly, with the particular clarity that comes after the thing you were afraid of actually happens, and you see the exact moment you could have stopped it. At 03:41 hours, on a section of trail that was flat and familiar from 2 rehearsal walks, Ranger went down. Mara was beside him in the same motion. Her knees hit the stone, and she was already running her hands along his ribcage, his abdomen, under his harness straps, checking for the things she could identify fast. No blood. No wound she could find by feel. His chest was moving, which meant he was breathing. But the rhythm was wrong. Too shallow, too fast. out of sequence with the effort he should have been expending. She pressed 2 fingers against the inside of his rear leg and found his femoral pulse. It was rapid and uneven, in a way that made her jaw tighten. "Voss!" Solus appeared at her right shoulder, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone who had already assessed the situation and formed a conclusion. "We have a timeline. We move." 60 seconds. She did not look up. "We do not have 60 seconds. I'm not asking for 60 seconds. I'm telling you I need 60 seconds. She pulled her red lens flashlight and checked Ranger's gum color. Pale. The particular pale that had nothing to do with cold or exhaustion. The pale of a cardiovascular system working too hard to keep up with demands being placed on it. Something is wrong with him. Something that was already wrong when we put his harness on tonight. Solus crouched beside her, and she could feel the controlled tension coming off him the way heat comes off pavement. He's a working dog, boss. They get injured on missions. We mark his position and recover him on exfil. Mara finally looked up. She looked directly at him in the dark, which took effort because what she was feeling was not the kind of thing she was supposed to bring into an operational conversation. "Sir, Ranger has run this elevation profile twice in rehearsal. His conditioning is elite. He does not fold on flat ground at the 40-minute mark of an approach, unless something is already wrong with him physiologically." She kept her voice level. "So I need to know who signed off on his pre-mission medical check, because the way his pulse is presenting right now, this didn't start tonight." The pause that followed was 3 seconds. She counted them. "That is not a tactical question right now," Solus said. "It absolutely is." She held his gaze. "Because if someone cleared him for this mission when he was already compromised, then the question isn't whether I leave my partner on a rock. The question is who made that call and why. And that is very much a tactical question when it's about whether I can trust the pre-mission documentation on anything else we were given tonight." A Marine corporal 10 meters up the trail had turned around and was watching them. 2 others had slowed without stopping. Nobody said anything. The night was cold and quiet except for the wind. Solus stood up. "Chief Holt stays back with you. You have 15 minutes. Then you move to the hold position, with or without the dog." He was already moving before he finished the sentence. Mara did not watch him go. She was already reaching for her field kit, keeping one hand on Ranger's flank. He had not moved since he went down. He was watching her face with his amber eyes, the same steady focus he brought to everything, the same absolute faith that she was the correct person to be deciding what happened next. "I've got you," she said quietly. "Just stay still." His tail moved once against the stone. Just once. Chief Petty Officer Dana Holt was there in under a minute, and Mara had always appreciated that about her. Holt did not ask questions that wasted time. She came in fast, read the situation from Ranger's posture and Mara's expression, and started her own assessment without commentary. "Cardiac presentation," Mara said. "Pulse is irregular. He's been running slower than baseline since we stepped off." Holt ran practiced hands along Ranger's chest, checked his eyes, pressed a stethoscope to his ribs. She listened for a long moment. Then she pulled the earpieces out and looked at Mara with the specific expression of someone who has confirmed a suspicion they wish they hadn't had. "When was his last cardiac evaluation?" Holt asked. 6 weeks ago. I submitted a request for extended monitoring after a recovery exercise flagged an elevated rate that wouldn't normalize. I followed up twice. Both times I was told the file was under review. Holt was quiet for a moment. "Pull his mission packet." Mara unzipped the waterproof sleeve on the back of Ranger's harness and pulled the laminated health summary. She angled her flashlight at it, reading fast. Then she stopped, went back to the top, read it again. The pre-mission blood work was dated 4 days ago. His weight notation was 3 kilograms higher than his actual current weight. His cardiac assessment showed a clean reading, a perfect reading, the kind of reading that did not match what she had been monitoring for 6 weeks. She turned the sheet over and looked at the certification number on the veterinary sign-off line. She did not recognize it. "Holt," she said. Her voice came out very careful. "This certification number, do you recognize it?" Holt took the sheet and read it, then read it again. She handed it back without speaking. "That's a no," Mara said. "That's a no." Ranger shifted slightly against the ground, a small adjustment of his weight, and Mara put her hand on his neck automatically. He pressed into it. He was shaking, very slightly, the kind of tremor that comes from a body working too hard to regulate itself. She could feel his heartbeat through the thick fur of his neck, rapid and arrhythmic, a pattern that should have pulled him from this mission 6 weeks ago. Someone had looked at this dog, at his history, at the flag in his file, and they had decided that the mission timeline mattered more than whether Ranger's heart was going to hold up on a mountain at 0300 hours. And then they had signed a name that wasn't theirs to a document that said he was fine. "Who does this?" she asked. Not to Holt, not to anyone specifically, just out loud, into the dark, because it needed to be said. Holt began setting up a fluid line, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been in difficult situations long enough to separate her feelings from her hands. "Right now, we stabilize him. The other question gets answered later." "Yes," Mara said, "it does." She looked down at Ranger, who was watching her with that same amber steadiness, the same total trust, the same complete certainty that she knew what she was doing, and that whatever she decided next was correct. He had no way of knowing that someone had put him here. He had no way of knowing that the document in his mission packet was a lie, dressed up in official formatting. He just knew her face, and her voice, and the pressure of her hand on his neck. And for him, that was enough. For her, it was nowhere close to enough. 14 minutes later, the radio crackled with Solus calling the hold position. Mara looked up from Ranger's stabilized pulse and heard something in the transmission that was not in the mission plan. Something urgent and clipped and slightly wrong. The kind of wrong she had learned to recognize the same way she had learned to recognize Ranger's breathing. She keyed her radio. "Element 2, say again your status." The response came back fragmented by terrain, but she caught the key words. "Contact. North Ridge. 2 shooters." And then, beneath the static, a single additional detail that changed the geometry of everything. Solus's voice. "Pushing element to the drainage channel south." Mara's hand went still on Ranger's flank. Ranger's ears had come up, both of them, fully forward, and he was not oriented toward the North Ridge where the shots were coming from. He was oriented slightly east of north, and he was trying to lift himself off the ground. Mara's hand pressed flat against Ranger's ribs, and she felt it before she fully understood it. He was trying to stand. Not the frantic scramble of a panicked animal. Deliberate, controlled. The specific physical intention of a working dog that had identified a threat and was attempting to report it. "Stay," she said. "Ranger, stay." He stayed, but his ears did not move. Both locked forward, angled slightly east of north, vibrating with the precision of instruments tuned to a frequency nobody else in that mountain could hear. Mara stared at him for 1 full second. Then she grabbed her radio. "Element 2, do not push south. Repeat, do not move into the drainage channel. I have a canine alert on a position south of your current hold." Static. Then Solus's voice, tight and flat. "Boss, you are not in a tactical position to make that call right now." "Sir, my dog is alerting on the drainage channel, with both ears forward and locked. He can't stand up and he is still trying to orient his body toward a threat south of your position." That is not a guess. That is a trained detection response. 3 seconds of silence. Then Holt's voice came across a different channel, calm and deliberate. Confirming from hold position. 2 of ours were already moving to push that direction. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when everyone on a radio net simultaneously realizes how close something was. "Hold all elements," Solis said. His voice had changed. Not softer, differently hard. "Nobody moves south. Confirm." Confirmations came back one by one. Mara exhaled through her nose and looked down at Ranger, who had not moved. He was still oriented south, still locked, his whole body a single pointed statement about what was buried in that drainage channel. His breathing was labored. His front left leg was trembling with the effort of holding his position. But he held it. "You found it," she said quietly. "Good boy. I've got it from here." He dropped his head back to the stone. The effort had cost him. Holt appeared at Mara's shoulder, already updating the saline drip rate. "EOD is going to want confirmation." "They'll get it." 2 engineers crawled forward from the hold position 12 minutes later, moving wide and slow around the area Ranger had flagged. Mara watched them work from a distance, with her hand resting on Ranger's back, feeling the uneven rhythm of his heart through the warmth of his coat. She had memorized that rhythm over 2 years. She knew exactly how wrong it was tonight, and she knew exactly why. And the knowing sat in her chest like something with weight and edges. The engineer team lead's voice came across the net at 040, 2 hours. "Confirming IED, command wire device, pressure plate secondary, buried in the culvert floor. This thing would have taken out an armored vehicle." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then a Marine corporal at the hold position said, very quietly, "The dog found that." "Yes," Mara said into her radio. "He did." Solis's voice came back measured and deliberate. "Voss, outstanding call." She did not respond to that. She was looking at Ranger, who was resting now, eyes half open, tail still. He had done what he was trained to do. He had done it with a failing heart on a cold mountain with an IV line taped to his leg. He had done it because the mission was not over, and he understood that with every cell in his body, and nobody had needed to ask him. She thought about the certification number on his health record, the one that belonged to nobody currently licensed in the unit. She thought about it, and let it settle into the part of her that was going to deal with it later, methodically and completely, the same way she dealt with everything that needed to be dealt with. The EOD team disabled the device in 22 minutes. The ambush element on the North Ridge disengaged when the southern push never materialized, and they realized the trap had closed on nothing. The 4 hostages were extracted from the structure by the primary element without additional contact, and were at the collection point by 04:51 hours. Mara was still on the mountain with Ranger when the extraction birds lifted. She had requested and received permission to wait for the medevac asset that was being repositioned for the K9 transport. Holt stayed with her. Neither of them talked much. There was not much to say that the situation was not already saying clearly enough on its own. At 05:09 hours, while they waited, Solis came back up the trail. Alone. He crouched a few meters away, looked at Ranger, then looked at Mara. "The engineer said that setup would have collapsed the road under the lead vehicle," he said. "Kill zone for everyone behind it." "I know." "He detected that from 40 meters out, on a cardiac episode, with a compromised evaluation on his record." Mara looked at him steadily. "Yes." Solis was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the ridge, and the temperature was dropping, and nobody acknowledged either of those things. "The certification number on his health record," he said finally. "I need to know if you already know what that means." "I know it belongs to nobody currently licensed in this unit," Mara said. I know Ranger was flagged 6 weeks ago for cardiac monitoring, and that flag was never resolved. I know his pre-mission documentation was altered to show a clean clearance that does not match his actual medical history." She paused. "What I don't know yet is who made that call, and whether you knew about it." The question landed between them without softening. That was intentional. She was not interested in softening it. Solis held her gaze for a long moment. Whatever she was reading in his expression was not guilt exactly. It was something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked like a man reconstructing a sequence of decisions he had made, and beginning to understand, clearly and too late, what those decisions had actually cost. "There was a flag in my inbox 7 weeks ago," he said. "Preliminary note from the vet support chain. It said the dog should be held from the next rotation, pending cardiac evaluation." He stopped. "I filed it as pending action. I had 4 other operational priorities that week, and I moved on." Mara did not react visibly. She had learned, a long time ago, how to receive information that made her furious, without letting the fury change her face before she had decided what to do with it. "So you knew there was a question about his clearance?" "I knew there was a preliminary flag. I didn't know someone had gone around the monitoring requirement and falsified his documentation." "But the question was there," she said, "and it got filed." He did not answer that, because there was no answer to that, which was also honest. The medevac asset came in at 05:34 hours, and Mara supervised the loading herself, making sure Ranger's harness connections were secure, and the IV line was protected, and that he was oriented in the way that would put the least stress on his cardiac system during transport. He was alert during the whole process, watching her movements with the patient attention of a dog who had been through enough loud, fast, difficult things that one more did not require alarm. As she climbed in beside him and the bird lifted, she looked down through the open door at the mountain falling away beneath them, at the trail where he had gone down, at the culvert where the device had been buried, at the geography of a night that could have ended very differently. She thought about 8 people who were going home. She thought about a command wire device that had been waiting in a drainage channel for something to trigger it. She thought about a dog with a damaged heart who had smelled it from 40 meters out in the dark and dragged himself toward alignment because that was what he was built to do. Then she thought about a certification number that belonged to nobody, and a flag filed as pending action, and a health record that had been rewritten to say a lie in official language. And she understood with complete clarity that the night was not over. The mountain part was over. The part with weapons and wire and cold stone was over. The other part had barely started. Ranger pressed his muzzle against her knee and held it there. She put her hand on the back of his neck and kept it there for the whole flight, feeling his pulse, counting the beats, tracking every irregularity with the attention of someone who was not going to let anything else happen to him that she could prevent. 11 days of investigation were waiting on the other side of that flight. She did not know that yet. What she knew was that she had asked one question on a mountain trail, standing over a collapsed partner in the dark, and nobody had answered it. And that was the most important thing anyone had not said to her in 2 years of service. Who signed off on his pre-mission medical check? She was going to find out. She was going to find out exactly and completely, and she was going to follow that answer wherever it went, regardless of what rank it wore, or what office it worked from, or how many pending action files it had used to make itself invisible. The bird leveled out over the ridge, and Ranger exhaled slowly beneath her hand, a long and tired breath that carried the particular weight of a body that had given everything it had, and was only now beginning to understand that it was allowed to rest. She stayed right there beside him. She was not going anywhere. The field hospital at the forward operating base did not smell like a hospital. It smelled like diesel fuel and antiseptic, and the particular staleness of air that had been recycled through too many tents for too many months. Mara had been in places like this before. She had never arrived in one, holding a dog's harness with both hands, like she was afraid someone was going to take him away the moment she let go. The admin officer met them at the intake point. Clipboard, pen, the practiced neutrality of someone who processed too many arrivals to have a separate reaction for each one. Priority medical intake. The officer scanned Mara's ID, then looked at Ranger on the litter beside her. Human casualties to the main bay. Non-military animals to holding if there's space available. Mara did not move. He's not a non-military animal. The officer glanced at the retirement notation, still clipped to Ranger's harness from his original service record. The tag that had never been properly updated through 3 years of bureaucratic limbo. Status shows retired, unfit for service. That puts him outside priority intake authorization. His status was falsified, Mara said. His pre-mission health clearance was signed with a certification number that belongs to nobody currently licensed in this unit. He was deployed on a compromised cardiac evaluation that someone rewrote to hide an existing flag. She kept her voice level, because raising it would not get Ranger into a treatment bay faster. Tonight he detected a command wire IED that would have killed 8 people. He did it with an arrhythmia that should have pulled him from this mission 6 weeks ago. So I need you to tell me, what authorization category covers a military working dog who just saved a convoy while someone's paperwork said he didn't exist? The officer's pen had stopped moving halfway through that sentence. She looked at Mara, then at Ranger, then back at Mara. I understand what you're saying, but regulations are clear on retired status. Without active duty classification, he's not entitled to priority medical resources. Then change his classification. I don't have the authority to do that. Who does? A voice behind her answered before the officer could. I do. Mara turned. Senior Chief Petty Officer Warren Briggs was walking toward them from the operations corridor, and she recognized him the way you recognize someone whose reputation precedes them by about 3 years. Sealed trident. A face that had made 1,000 hard decisions and showed the weight of most of them. He was reading something on a tablet as he walked, and he did not look up from it until he was standing 2 meters away. MWD 763, he said. Ranger. Handler Mara Voss, Canine Integration, Tier 1 certification. He lowered the tablet. I've been reading your field report for the last 20 minutes. Also the engineer logs from the IED detection. Also the helmet cam footage from the hold position. He looked at Ranger, who was watching him with amber eyes from the litter, still alert despite everything his body had been through. That's a trained alert posture in the footage. Clean, textbook. Yes, sir. And the pre-mission documentation. Falsified. The cardiac flag from 6 weeks ago was never resolved. Someone signed the clean clearance using the certification number that doesn't match any currently licensed personnel in the veterinary support chain. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to believe her. The quiet of someone deciding how much of what they already know to say out loud. I know about the flag, he said. The 2 words landed like a change in air pressure. Mara felt something shift in her chest. Sir? I received a copy of the preliminary veterinary note 7 weeks ago, flagged for my awareness as Unit Senior Chief. He held her gaze without flinching. I forwarded it to Lieutenant Commander Solis for action, and considered it handled. I did not follow up to confirm that action was taken. The admin officer had taken a small step backward. She was no longer writing anything. Mara looked at Briggs and made herself stay very still, because the thing she was feeling right now was not the kind of thing that served her in this corridor, in this moment, in front of this man. So 2 people in the chain of command received notification that Ranger needed to be held from operational rotation pending cardiac evaluation, she said. And neither one confirmed that the hold was implemented. That is correct. And someone, at some point below both of those notifications, decided to clear him anyway by falsifying the documentation. That appears to be what happened. She breathed in through her nose, breathed out. Sir, I need Ranger in a treatment bay. Briggs turned to the admin officer. Update MWD 763 to active operational status. Operations service restored. Effective tonight. He gets priority medical intake. He handed the officer his authorization card without looking at her. Do it now. The officer took the card and moved, fast. Mara crouched beside Ranger's litter. He was looking at her the way he always looked at her when something important had just happened, and he was waiting to understand if it was the kind of important that required him to do something. You're back on the books, she said quietly. You're going to be okay. His tail moved twice against the litter fabric, slow and deliberate. She stayed with him until the veterinary team came, and then she stepped back and let them work. And she stood in the corridor outside the treatment area, with her back against the wall and her arms crossed, and her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, while she processed what Briggs had just told her. 2 people in the chain had known. Neither had followed up. And then someone below them had buried the question under a forged signature rather than deal with what the question actually meant. She thought about the 8 people who had almost walked into that drainage channel. She thought about the lead vehicle in the convoy that would have hit the pressure plate first. She thought about Ranger dragging himself to a 3-legged alert posture with a heart that had been quietly failing under the weight of a mission he should never have been assigned to in the first place. She was still standing there when Holt came around the corner and stopped beside her. They stood together without speaking for a moment. Holt had that quality that good medics develop, the ability to read a situation's emotional temperature without requiring anyone to explain it. Briggs told you, Holt said. It was not a question. He told me. What are you going to do? Mara looked at her. Everything. Holt nodded slowly. I figured. She reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Before we lifted, I documented my field assessment. Time-stamped, included the pulse rate, the gum color, the arrhythmia pattern I confirmed on auscultation, wrote it as a formal medical observation. She held it out. Thought you might want a copy. Mara took it. She unfolded it, read it, folded it back. Thank you. I also noted the certification number from the health record. Holt's voice was steady and careful. And I ran it against the unit veterinary personnel roster when we landed. It belongs to a vet tech named Specialist Aaron Daly. He was reassigned to a rear area support unit 8 months ago. He has not held an active operational clearance since the transfer. Mara went still. Someone used his old number. Someone used his old number on a document dated 4 days ago. The silence between them carried the weight of what that meant. Not just an oversight, not just a flag that got buried in a pending action folder. Someone had deliberately selected a certification number from a person no longer in the operational chain, used it to authenticate a fraudulent medical clearance, and sent a dog with a damaged heart up a mountain in the middle of the night. Where is Daly now? Mara asked. Rear support compound, about 40 minutes from here. Does he know his number was used? I don't know. Mara refolded the paper a second time, pressing the crease flat with her thumbnail. He's about to find out. She pushed off the wall, and Holt fell into step beside her without being asked. They had made it halfway down the corridor when a door opened to their right, and Solus stepped out. He looked like a man who had not slept, and had been making decisions in the dark about what to say when he saw her. "Voss." He stopped in front of her. "I need to talk to you." "I know about the flag, sir. I know you filed it as pending. I know Briggs received a copy, and I now know whose certification number is on Ranger's clearance form. And that person has not held an active operational authorization for 8 months. She did not slow down. "So unless you have information I don't already have, this conversation should wait until I've spoken to Specialist Daly." Sola stepped into her path, not aggressively, with the specific body language of someone who needs to be heard before something happens that cannot be undone. "Mara." She stopped. He had never used her first name before, not once in 8 months of working under his command. "There is something you don't know," he said, "about why Daly's number was used, about who gave the order to clear the dog." He looked at her for a long moment, and in his expression she read something she had not expected to find there. Something that looked like relief. Like a man who had been waiting for someone to ask exactly the right question so he could finally stop carrying the answer alone. It wasn't Daly's decision. He was told to sign it. By name, by rank, by someone who told him that if the dog didn't deploy, the mission timeline collapsed and the hostages didn't come home. Mara stared at him. Who told him that? Solus exhaled, and then he said a name with 2 stars attached to it, a name that belonged to someone 3 levels above his pay grade and 4 levels above hers. Someone whose decisions moved through the unit like weather, accepted as conditions rather than questioned as choices. The corridor was very quiet. Holt made a small sound behind her that was not quite a word. Mara did not move for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. She was doing the thing she did when information arrived that was larger than the container she had prepared for it, pressing it down into something manageable, organizing it into what it meant and what it required, and what order those things needed to happen in. "Does Daly know you know?" she asked. "No." "Does anyone else know what you just told me?" "No." She looked at him for one more second, reading his face with the same attention she had given Ranger's body on the mountain. Looking for the thing that was slightly wrong, the note played half a tone flat. She did not find it. What she found was a man who had made a bad decision and a worse decision, and had arrived at the place where continuing to make them was no longer something he could live with. "You're going to write all of that down," she said. "Every detail, time-stamped, signed, and you're going to do it tonight, before anyone in that chain of command has any reason to think this conversation happened." "I know," Sola said. "That's why I'm telling you now." She held his gaze for another beat. Then she moved past him down the corridor, and Holt moved with her, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Because what had just happened in that hallway was the kind of thing that required a few steps of walking to absorb. Someone had sent Ranger up that mountain, knowing, not ignoring, not overlooking, knowing, and making the calculation that a dog's heart was an acceptable variable in an operational equation. And then making sure the paperwork said something different than the truth. Mara's jaw was tight, and her hands were steady, and somewhere behind her, in a treatment bay, Ranger's heart was beating with the irregular, determined rhythm of something that refused to stop. She was going to make sure the people responsible for that understood exactly what they had been willing to throw away. She was going to do it carefully and completely, and she was going to follow it all the way to the top, regardless of how many stars were up there waiting. Specialist Aaron Daly was 22 years old, and he looked every year of it when Mara walked into the rear support compound's administrative office at 0647 hours and sat down across the table from him without introducing herself or explaining why she was there. She put Holt's field assessment on the table between them. She put the laminated health summary from Ranger's harness beside it. She smoothed both documents flat with the palm of her hand, and then she looked at him and waited. He lasted about 4 seconds. "I was told it was authorized," he said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I was told the evaluation had been reviewed at command level and that the formal clearance just needed to be processed through my signature because my supervisor was on leave and the system required an active, credentialed signatory." "Your credential was expired," Mara said. "You were transferred 8 months ago. Your operational authorization didn't transfer with you." "I know that." He looked at the table. "I told them that." "What did they say?" He exhaled slowly. He was not a bad person. She could see that clearly enough, and it did not make her feel better or worse about why she was sitting across from him. It just made the whole thing more precisely what it was. They said the credential was still in the system as valid, that the transfer paperwork hadn't been fully processed on the administrative side yet, that technically I was still authorized. He paused. "I should have pushed back harder." "Yes," Mara said. "You should have." He looked up at her for the first time. His eyes were red at the edges in the way that meant he had not slept and had been aware for hours that something had gone very wrong. "Is the dog okay?" She held his gaze. "He's alive. He's in treatment." He detected a command wire, IED, on the mission you cleared him for, with a cardiac arrhythmia that should have pulled him from operational rotation 6 weeks ago. He did it on 3 legs, with an IV line taped to his leg. She let that sit for a moment. "So I need you to tell me exactly who told you to sign that document. The name, the rank, and every word of that conversation." Daly told her. It took 11 minutes, and she recorded all of it. She left the compound at 07:20, 4 hours, with a signed statement and a recording, and the particular feeling of someone who has pulled a thread and watched an entire seam begin to come apart. The name Solis had given her the night before matched the name Daly gave her now. Rear Admiral Clifford Mace. 40 years of service. A career built on mission success rates that the institution measured in cleared objectives and recovered personnel, and operational timelines met or beaten. The kind of record that made people trust your judgment without questioning your methods, because the results were always there on paper, in rows of clean numbers. Ranger was not a number. Mara was going to make sure that was understood. She met with the Judge Advocate General's office at 08:30 hours. She presented Holt's field assessment, the falsified health record, Daly's signed statement, her own field recording, and Solis's written account, which he had delivered to her in a sealed envelope at 07:15 hours, with his signature across the seal. She laid everything on the table in chronological order and walked the JAG officer through it without editorializing, because the facts were already editorial enough. The JAG officer, a lieutenant commander named Esperanza, who had the kind of face that had heard many things and been surprised by very few of them, read through the documents in sequence. She reached Solis's account and slowed down. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at Mara with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite the absence of it. "You understand what you're alleging," Esperanza said. "I'm not alleging anything. I'm presenting documentation." "You understand what this documentation alleges?" "Yes." Mara held her gaze steadily. A flag existed. 2 officers in the chain received it and did not act on it. A junior specialist was directed by a flag officer to authenticate a fraudulent medical clearance using an expired credential. A working dog with a known cardiac condition was deployed on a Tier 1 mission. That dog subsequently saved 8 lives and is currently in a veterinary treatment bay. She paused. "I'm not interested in what this is politically complicated to pursue. I'm interested in what it actually is." Esperanza was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "Walk me through the timeline again, from the beginning." Mara walked her through it. Twice. By the time she left the JAG office at 11:40 hours, a formal inquiry had been opened and 3 names had been noted for interview. She went directly from there to the veterinary facility and sat down in the chair beside Ranger's kennel. And for the first time since she had stepped off the mountain, she let herself stop moving. He was awake. His eyes tracked to her the moment she came through the door, amber and steady. And she thought about how many times those eyes had found her in difficult situations and been the thing that kept her oriented to what mattered most. She put her fingers through the kennel gate, and he pressed his nose against them. "It's moving," she told him. "It's going to take time, but it's moving." He breathed out slowly, a long exhale that she felt against her fingers. She sat there for 40 minutes. She did not read anything or check her messages or rehearse what came next. She just sat with him and let the morning be as quiet as it was going to get, because she understood that the quiet was temporary. She was right about that. At 13:40 hours, Senior Chief Briggs found her in the facility corridor with an expression that had added several new weights to it since the night before. He did not lead with pleasantries. Neither did she. "Mace's staff is aware that an inquiry has been opened," he said. "How?" "These things move fast when the right people start making calls." His jaw was tight. "Mace's chief of staff has already submitted a formal response characterizing the clearance decision as a command judgment call under operational time pressure, with full awareness of associated risk." Mara felt her pulse tick upward. He's saying he knew Ranger's cardiac status and deployed him anyway as an authorized risk decision? He's saying the mission parameters required a K9 asset. The timeline did not allow for a replacement, and the decision was made at his level with full command authority. Briggs looked at her. He's also saying that the outcome, 4 hostages recovered, 0 casualties, i.e. deneutralized, validates the decision. The outcome validates sending a sick dog up a mountain on falsified paperwork? That's his argument. She thought about that for a deliberate 3 seconds. Then she said, "Daly told him his credential was expired." Briggs went still. "How do you know that?" "Because Daly told me. On recording." She held his gaze. "Mace's staff told Daly the transfer paperwork hadn't cleared administratively yet, and his credential was still technically valid. But Daly flagged the expiration question before he signed, which means Mace's office knew the authorization was questionable before the document was executed and directed him to proceed anyway." She paused. "That's not a command judgment call under operational pressure. That's directing a subordinate to commit fraud with knowledge that the underlying credential was invalid." Briggs closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. It was the most visible reaction she had seen from him. "That recording is in JAG's possession," she added. "Filed this morning." When he opened his eyes, something in them had shifted. Not against her, in alignment with her. "You covered your ground before you came to me." "I covered Ranger's ground," she said. "That's the same thing." Briggs nodded once, slowly. Then he said something she had not expected. "There are 2 other dogs." She waited. "While you were at JAG, I pulled the full veterinary audit from the past 18 months. Not just Ranger's file, the entire K9 clearance record for the unit." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded summary sheet. 2 other working dogs were cleared for deployment during periods when their medical files showed unresolved flags. Different conditions, different missions. Both dogs completed their assignments without incident, and nobody ever looked at the paperwork twice because there were no complaints. Mara took the sheet and read it. The names and dates were different, but the pattern was identical. Flag received, flag not resolved, clearance issued, mission executed, documentation filed and forgotten. "This is a system," she said. "Yes." This wasn't one decision under pressure. Someone established a practice. That's what the audit suggests. She folded the sheet and held it. She thought about the junior vet tech who had been told his credential was still valid. She thought about Solus filing a flag as pending action because he had 4 other priorities that week. She thought about the way systems protect themselves, not through dramatic corruption, but through the accumulation of small accommodations, each one individually defensible, collectively catastrophic. She thought about Ranger's heart beating in an uneven rhythm under her hand on the mountain he should never have been on. "I'm submitting this to the inquiry," she said. "I know." Briggs met her eyes. "I'm submitting a command statement supporting the inquiry's scope expansion. It'll be on record by end of day." She looked at him. "That's going to cost you something." "Probably." He said it without flinching. Ranger detected a device that would have collapsed a road under an armored vehicle. He did it compromised and unreserved and without a single hesitation. The least I can do is not hesitate either. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she extended her hand, not as a subordinate to a superior, but as one person to another who has just made a decision that matters. He shook it. She went back to Ranger's kennel and sat down again. The veterinarian came by at 1500 hours with an update. The arrhythmia was responding to treatment. The cardiac structure showed no permanent damage. With proper rest and a regulated recovery timeline, he could expect a full return to quality of life. Possibly, with careful evaluation, a return to limited operational work. Mara listened to all of that and then asked the only question she cared about at that moment. "Will he be okay?" The veterinarian smiled for the first time. "Yes, he'll be okay." She turned back to the kennel. Ranger was watching her with those amber eyes, patient and complete. And she thought about everything he had done on that mountain, without being asked, without recognition, without any understanding of the bureaucratic argument being made about whether his existence counted. He had just done the work. Because the work was there, and he was there, and that was the entire extent of his calculation. She was still sitting there, hand through the gate, when a knock came at the facility door, and the young corporal entered with a message slip. He handed it to her with the slightly wide-eyed expression of someone who had learned in the last few hours that the woman sitting in the dog ward was the reason 3 inquiry files had been opened before noon. She read the message slip. It was 4 lines. The inquiry had been formally elevated to the Inspector General's office. Admiral Mace had been notified that his staff would be interviewed under oath, and the unit had received a request from the IG's office for the complete operational record of MWD Ranger, including all mission logs, health records, and field assessments for submission as primary evidence. Ranger's record, the real one, was going somewhere it could not be buried in a pending action folder. She folded the message slip and put it in her pocket. She looked at Ranger. He looked back at her with the steady, unremarkable certainty of a dog who had no idea he had just become the center of something much larger than one mountain and one night, and one question asked in the dark. "You have no idea what you started," she said quietly. His tail moved once. Just once. It was enough. The inquiry took 11 days. Mara spent most of them inside the veterinary facility during the hours she was not being interviewed, and inside interview rooms during the hours she was not at the facility. And she did not sleep more than 4 consecutive hours on any of those 11 nights. She did not complain about that to anyone. There was no one she wanted to complain to. The IG interviews were formal and thorough and conducted by a colonel named Whitfield, who asked every question twice from slightly different angles and watched her face while she answered. looking for the place where her account would soften or shift or develop the kind of convenient imprecision that accounts develop when they have been constructed rather than remembered. He did not find it. She had not constructed anything. She had documented everything in real time because she had understood from the moment she pulled that health record in the dark on a mountain that documentation was the only currency that could not be argued away later. Mace's legal team tried 3 different approaches over the course of the inquiry. The first was operational necessity. The argument Briggs had already described, that the mission parameters required a canine asset and the timeline required a decision. And the decision had been made at an appropriate command level with full awareness of risk. Colonel Whitfield received that argument and noted it, and asked Mace's representative to explain why, if the decision had been made openly at command level with full awareness, the health record had been amended to show a clean clearance rather than a documented command risk acceptance. The representative did not have a clean answer for that. The second approach was credential technicality. The argument that Daly's transfer paperwork had created a genuine administrative ambiguity about his authorization status at the time of signing. Whitfield received that argument and noted it, and then played the recording Mara had made of Daly's account of the conversation, specifically the portion where Daly stated clearly that he had flagged the expiration question to Mace's staff before signing and been directed to proceed. Whitfield asked whether directing a subordinate to authenticate a document after that subordinate had explicitly flagged a credential validity question constituted reliance on administrative ambiguity or something else entirely. The representative asked for a recess. The third approach was the most direct, and the one that made Mara's jaw tighten the most when she heard about it secondhand from Esperanza. Mace's team submitted a character brief, emphasizing Ranger's successful operational outcome, the 4 hostages recovered, the IED neutralized, 8 personnel returned without casualties, and argued that a formal finding against the commanding officer responsible for that outcome would have a chilling effect on command decision-making authority in time-critical operational environments. Whitfield's written response to that argument was 3 sentences. The outcome of a mission does not retroactively authorize the methods used to execute it. Command decision-making authority does not extend to directing subordinates to falsify medical documentation. The integrity of the system that protects both human and working animal personnel depends on that boundary being maintained without exception. Mara read those 3 sentences 4 times. On the 9th day, Daly was called for his formal interview. He had requested to speak with Mara beforehand, and she had agreed, and they had sat across from each other in the same administrative office where she had first put his certification number on the table between them. Except that this time, he was the one who placed something on the table first. It was a printed email chain. 4 messages. The timestamps ran from 6 weeks before the mission to 3 days before it. She read it and understood immediately what she was looking at. The chain documented Mace's staff making 3 separate requests to the Veterinary Support Section for Rangers deployment clearance. Each request escalating in urgency. The third one containing language about mission timeline and operational necessity that was not a request at all. And below that third message, a reply from a vet tech supervisor, not Daly, instructing Daly to process the clearance and use the documentation on file. "My supervisor sent this to me," Daly said. "He told me to handle it and not to ask questions about the command context. I should have asked anyway." He looked at the table. "I've been asking them for 11 days in my head." "You're giving this to the inquiry?" "Already submitted it this morning." He looked up at her. "How is Ranger doing?" She held his gaze for a moment. "Better every day." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad." He meant it. She could hear that clearly. "I want you to know that I never thought about him as just a number on a form. I thought he was already cleared at a level above me, and I was just processing paperwork. That was wrong. I know that was wrong. But I want you to know I wasn't thinking of him as disposable." "I know," she said. And she did know. That was the thing about systems that accumulated small accommodations. The people inside them were not usually monsters. They were usually people who told themselves that someone above them had already made the hard call, and their job was just to process the result. That's exactly why the system has to change, because the next person who tells themselves the same thing might not have Ranger's luck. He had nothing to say to that. Neither did she. She picked up her copy of the email chain and left. On the 11th day, Whitfield's preliminary findings were issued. Admiral Mace was relieved of command pending final review. His chief of staff received a formal letter of reprimand. The vet tech supervisor who had directed Daly to process the clearance was referred for administrative separation. Daly received a letter of reprimand that formally acknowledged the institutional pressure under which he had acted, language that had not been in the initial draft, and that Esperanza told Mara had been added after Whitfield reviewed the email chain. 3 new canine welfare protocols were submitted for unit-wide implementation, effective immediately. Independent veterinary sign-off required on all working dog clearances before deployment. No chain of command override permitted. Unresolved medical flags to be treated as automatic deployment holds until formally cleared by the veterinary officer of record. And a full audit of canine operational records across 4 units, covering the past 24 months. Mara read the findings in the corridor outside the veterinary facility, with her back against the wall and her eyes moving line by line through language that was careful and institutional, and would never fully capture what it had cost to get it written. When she finished, she folded the document, put it in her jacket pocket, and went inside to sit with Ranger. He was standing when she came in, not lying down, not resting, standing at the front of his kennel, with his ears forward and his weight distributed evenly across all 4 legs for the first time since the mountain. The veterinarian had cleared him for supervised movement that morning, and he had apparently decided that morning that supervised movement meant standing at the kennel gate, waiting for her. She stopped when she saw him. Just stopped walking for a second, because the sight of him standing like that, solid and square and completely himself, did something to her chest that she was not going to try to describe to anyone. "Look at you," she said. His tail moved, not once, continuously. She opened the kennel, and he walked out slowly, careful with his front left leg, but walking. She crouched down, and he pressed his head against her shoulder, and she put both arms around him and held on. And for about 30 seconds, she did not think about inquiry findings, or command structures, or certification numbers, or any of the 11 days she had just lived through. She just held her dog and felt him breathe, and let that be enough. Then she sat back and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the understanding between them was the same as it had always been, complete and mutual, and requiring no translation. "You started something," she told him. "On that mountain. One alert, one sit, and it went all the way to the top." She stroked his ear. 4 units are going to audit their canine records because you wouldn't let your hot stop on a rock in the dark. He pressed his nose against her palm and held it there. She learned the rest of the outcomes in pieces over the following weeks. The 2 other dogs identified in Briggs's audit were pulled from operational rotation and given the evaluations they should have received months earlier. 1 was cleared after treatment. 1 was retired with full honors and placed with a civilian handler through a formal adoption program. Daly applied to veterinary school on the last day of the inquiry period and was accepted 3 weeks later. Solis was reassigned, with a notation in his record that was not a commendation and not a termination. A kind of institutional acknowledgement that a man had made bad decisions and then made a better one, and that both of those things were part of the permanent record now. Briggs retired 4 months after the inquiry closed. At his farewell, he said 2 things that Mara remembered. The first was that the measure of an institution was not what it celebrated, but what it was willing to look at when looking was uncomfortable. The second was that he had spent 30 years in rooms where the hardest decisions got made, and the most important question he had ever heard asked in one of those rooms was asked by a 22-year-old on her knees on a mountain trail in the dark. And it was 4 words long, and it had changed more than she would probably ever know. Ranger was cleared for light operational work on a Tuesday morning, 41 days after he collapsed. The veterinarian walked Mara through the final evaluation results and told her that with careful management and continued monitoring, he had every reason to keep working for years. She took him outside after the evaluation, just the 2 of them, moving together the way they always moved, his stride matching hers, his attention moving through the world around them with the focused and unhurried certainty of an animal who knew exactly what his purpose was and had never once questioned whether it was worth the cost. Someone had tried to reduce him to a line item, a mission asset, a number on a form that could be adjusted when the operational math required it. They had sent him up a mountain with a damaged heart and paperwork that said he was fine, and they had calculated that the mission outcome was worth more than whether he came back down. He had come back down anyway. He had come back down and taken 8 people with him, and changed the way an institution treated the animals it asked to walk into the dark ahead of everyone else. Mara Voss had asked one question in the worst moment of a very bad night. Who signed off on his pre-mission medical check? She had asked it because it was the only question she was capable of asking when her partner was on the ground, and the system was already moving to leave him behind. She had not known then that the answer would go all the way to a 2-star rank and bring 4 units worth of records into review and put new language into the formal protocols that governed how working dogs were protected. She had just needed to know the truth, and she had followed it exactly as far as it went. Ranger walked beside her in the morning light, his amber eyes reading everything around them with the same alert intelligence he had brought to every mission they had ever run together. And Mara understood with complete certainty what the last 41 days had proven. Loyalty did not expire when the paperwork said it did. Service did not end because someone filed it in the wrong folder. And one question asked in the dark by one person who refused to walk past something that did not look right could travel further than anyone standing on a cold mountain trail at 0341 hours could possibly imagine. Ranger was still working. He was always going to be still working. And as long as Mara Voss was breathing, nobody was ever going to look at him and see anything less than exactly what he was. A soldier. A partner. The most honest thing she had ever known.